The spring of 2021 was a wild time. It seemed like the world was about to start opening back up. Lockdown restrictions were being dropped, and having spent the past year in lockdown made me really antsy to get back out. One of the things I missed the most, of course, was travel. We had dreams of traveling with our newborn kid to Australia, Indonesia, and Alaska. And not just dreams, plane tickets. But you all know what happened. Then as the world started reopening, it looked like we would finally get to restart our plans. Travel. But then, this happened. If you didn't get a good look, yeah, those are twins. We were thrilled, but I'll be honest, I was also panicked that we just extended our own lockdown indefinitely. Having a kid makes it harder to leave the house. But 3, what was gonna happen to our dreams of sharing a life of travel and adventure with our kids? We might have to put that on hold for several years. Or maybe we can go with them.
Okay, let me fill you in on our kids and their travel histories. Right now, Rhys is 3. We managed some road trips. We went to Arizona, Big Sur, and Washington. Now that trip to Arizona I was just talking about, when we got back, we found out we were having twins. When Kai and Juniper were 5 months old, we brought them along with Rhys to Antigua, Guatemala. It was the first international trip for all 3 of them. Pretty ambitious, but a great memory. Our next bigger trip came about 3 months later when we took everyone to Alaska. And now, we're in the Philippines. Totally different ballgame with that length of flight, but we made it. This marks our 3rd time taking a trip as a family of 5, with all 3 kids being age 3 and under. And I'm no expert in this. I'm just a dad who loves to travel and tends to feel pretty optimistic about our ability to go places. Honestly, it is pretty hard to travel with kids, but it's so valuable. So if you're as motivated as I am to have those experiences and to learn from my experiences, well, I'm gonna share the handful of things I've learned that can hopefully make your life easier. My very first tip for traveling with littles: you gotta adjust your expectations accordingly. Obviously, I believe it can still be good, it can be worthwhile, otherwise I wouldn't be here doing that right now. But the flip side to that is you've just got to accept right off the bat that it's not gonna be the same. If you have all these fond memories of traveling in your life before kids, the good news is you can still do that after kids. But it's gonna be different. You can anticipate going at a different pace, a much, much slower one. Whenever we go somewhere and it's like a week or 2 long trip, make sure that we're trying to hit only 1 activity per day. The rest of it is reserved for figuring out meals, nap times, play, running around, or just sitting and hanging out. When we can go somewhere longer, I pretty much do the same amount of things, just at a slower pace. Alright, here's the other thing. At some point, expect shit to hit the fan. Meltdowns, accidents, you know what I'm talking about. If you do some advanced scouting, you can make your life a little easier, you know. Look up where the clinic is that you'll need to get help if needed. I had to take Juniper out to a clinic overnight just because she got a fever in Guatemala. It ended up being no big deal, but just knowing that gave me all the confidence I needed. Now remember, this stuff just comes standard with having kids, right? This'll happen to you even if you stay at home. So don't let that be the reason that you're held back. Another big thing to consider is where you're actually trying to go. The right location is going to vary a lot based on your kid's age and needs, but this can make or break the experience. I've heard somebody say your kids can go anywhere in the world that has kids. I kind of agree with the spirit of that statement, but just because they can go anywhere doesn't mean that they're all equally weighted. One thing you might want to consider is the cultural attitude towards kids and childhood in the place that you're going. In my experience with the Philippines, I found caretakers seem to really prioritize safety and not letting kids get hurt. Typically back at home, I like to give my kids a little bit of freedom to learn, and sometimes bumps and scrapes are a part of that, but I definitely would prefer them to err on the side of safety, so I'm good with that. You'll also want to consider infrastructure. Shortly after our twins were born, we thought about doing Ireland as our first international trip as a family of 5. We quickly found out that finding a car that can handle 3 adult passengers and 3 car seats is extremely rare in Ireland, especially if you're just going to be renting. Now, going somewhere with good public transit that can handle strollers, that's a big win. So a place like Toronto or Amsterdam gets a bump up. Distance is also a big factor. I'll talk more about the plane journey in a little bit, but that was definitely a big deciding factor in why our first international trip was Guatemala. And here's another big thing to consider. What are you gonna miss out on? Like, there's a lot of destinations out there that aren't exactly off limits for us, but if we were to go there with our kids at the super young age that they're at right now, we wouldn't be able to do a lot of the stuff that place is really known for. I'm thinking of places like Peru or New Zealand where hiking is a big part of the appeal and our kids just aren't able to handle that right now. Here's a pretty incomplete list of some places in general I've heard are pretty kid friendly. Japan, Australia, New Zealand, except for what I said earlier about the hiking, Turkey, Amsterdam, Costa Rica. Another big part of location to be considered is the actual place you'll be staying, your accommodations. But yeah, choose your location wisely. Think of your trips as more revolving around the place you'll be staying. It's like the total opposite of what I did in my 20s. I would just pay the cheapest amount I could for lodging, thinking that the whole point of me being somewhere was to spend time out in nature in the city, seeing it. That's one of the big things that's kind of different now. In Guatemala, we stayed in this 3-bedroom Encanto, basically. It was great. The homestay was a part of the experience, not just a place to sleep. If you have babies who are fast crawlers or new walkers, try and see as many photos of the place as you can. If you can, look on like Google and TripAdvisor and the Airbnb listing or just wherever, because that'll show you how much baby proofing you need to anticipate. Now, my favorite tip for traveling with kids, with babies, has been this: try and get a place with a balcony. You'll probably run into a moment where you put the kids down to sleep and it'll just be you and your partner, and you kind of wish you could go out and explore the town, but of course you gotta stay with the kids. With a balcony, you can at least be somewhat outside, feel a little more connected to your surroundings. You can grab a bottle of local wine or whatever the thing is to treat yourself with from the place you're staying, and just spend some quality time with each other, catch up on the day's adventures, all that. So when it comes to travel with kids, age is much more than a number. Your kids' ages and stage of development is going to determine what the experience looks like for you. I can't give a black and white list of which ages are easy and hard because it doesn't quite work like that, but here's some general thoughts. Newborns are going to be rough. It's going to be hard anytime you have a kid who doesn't have consistency when it comes to sleep. But if you get a kid who knows, night from day, who's mostly sleeping through the night, that is so much better. Fast crawlers, early walkers, those guys are going to give you a harder time falling off stuff or bonking their heads. All right, and then when toddlers hit like 2.5, they're at that stage where their emotional part of the brain is just way out in front of the logic center, and that's when you get a whole bunch of meltdowns, tantrums, that sort of thing. That's why it's called the terrible twos, even though it can strike within a wider range. Just know that's probably going to be a hard time too, and you can imagine why. Of course, this all goes without saying. Every kid is different, and you know yours best. But I think it's helpful to remember that age is a factor, because if you're deciding between places, it might occur to you that waiting 4 more months for one place might make it a whole better experience. Or if you are thinking about one place versus the other, it might immediately become obvious which one works better this year versus next year. A big part of being a parent is just knowing how to make life easier on yourself. So that means asking for help, knowing who to ask for help from, and all those little life hacks you learn along the way. Now, the thing about travel is you lose a bunch of those things, but you can try and see how much of this you can offset. We were able to invite my mom along to our Guatemala trip. We stayed in a place with a bunch of rooms and the flights there were cheap. She also already takes care of the kids while we work pretty regularly, and that kept a lot of our usual routines intact. One perk that's unique to being here in the Philippines is that we are able to hire some folks to help us with the kids. These are people who've worked as helpers for my family for a long time, so they're trusted, and we're able to pay them well by local standards, in a way that we're getting something really valuable out of this, and so are they. And it's gone really well. This has allowed us to go on more adult excursions. We're still around and we get to hang out with the kids, but we can also relax a bit more too. This has been really valuable after a full year of caring for 3 under 3. Okay, so before you go anywhere, let me share with you my packing suggestions. Now, I'm not a very big gear guy when it comes to almost anything, but here's a few things that have just made life and travel with kids a lot easier. Okay, so if your kids are super little, you probably use one of these a lot, right? Ours is a Snuggle Me. Some people use Dock-A-Tots, but it's like where they nap, where you park them. But it's not very travel friendly. This thing is humongous. So when we went to Guatemala, we went online, we found inflatable versions of them. This was really helpful because they rolled up about this size, which meant I could just strap it onto the bottom of my backpack. It didn't take up any more space, didn't take up any room inside the bag, and we brought it with us everywhere. That's where they slept at night while we were there. The Duna is a car seat that converts into a stroller, which is super useful because then that only counts as one item. For older kids who are in a front-facing car seat, okay, this is one of my favorite things right here. This is the Wavy Pico, and folded up all together, this thing is like 8 pounds, right? We don't typically travel with pack and plays. This might vary based on where we're going. A lot of hotels, if you call ahead of time and request a crib, they'll get you a crib. If you're staying in more of an Airbnb type place and you're in like the US, Canada, Europe, maybe Japan, Korea, some parts of Latin America, and you can find a specific baby consignment store, you can just get a used pack and play that you plan to sell back at the end of the trip. If you have twins like me though, make sure the people at the hotel clearly hear you requesting 2 cribs. Pretty much every time it's been like, oh, a crib, got it. And when I get there, it's like, I have twins, I need 2. So for toddlers and up, this is super helpful. We got Rhys's own backpack that he's stoked to bring with him when he flies. A book. We got headphones. We try and go with toys that don't scatter too easily. Something like this is called a Pop-It, which is just, it's as simple as it looks. It's very like tactile and everything, but kids love this stuff, man. Okay, let's talk about the flight, because I think this is the part that intimidates people the most, and for real, it's intimidating. Okay, let's start with the basics. Infants can travel on your lap until they turn 2. In domestic flights, this is pretty much free. International flights, you can still get this for cheaper. You have to pay taxes and fees, which are actually a good chunk of a ticket price, but you can shave off costs from most airlines. Okay, this is helpful to know. For very young travelers who can still sleep in a bassinet, probably like 6 months and under, a lot of planes have them on board. Typically that front row where the economy seats begin have these built-in hooks, and there's a bassinet on board that attaches there. It fits where you have that extra leg space, and it's so perfect if you want your arms free for the flight. Sadly, the pandemic perfectly overlapped with the time where my kids would have been the right age to travel this way. What you want to do is just book your tickets and then call the airlines ahead of time. Let them know you have kids that young and you're interested in the bassinet seat. Finally, you just gotta own the fact that when you have a lap infant or a really young kid and you're on a plane, you're not the person most people want to sit next to. I mean, your kids might start crying when everyone else is trying to go to sleep. They might make a big mess of their food on other people's laps. Kai kept trying to steal my neighbor's food on the last flight. That being said, just about everybody who I have sat next to while having lap infants or kid passengers has been super nice and super friendly. There is literally one exception I can think about. It was an older woman who got a little bit disgruntled with us, and my mom totally just went to bat for us and got her to be quiet. One idea I learned from my friend Gary that I'm eager to pass along is he and his wife, when they travel, get a package of like Hershey Kisses or some individually wrapped candy and just start doling them out to their neighbors, the people in front and in back of them, the flight attendants. It builds up a lot of goodwill. It just kind of tells people, hey, I know, I get it, I see you, and it works. But trust me, most people have just been really awesome to us. Travel, openness, and a respect for other people, nature, and culture are things I want to raise my kids with. Rhys is 3 and some change, and on this trip, I've been really impressed by him. He's been adaptable, flexible, and engaged. The hope was that by traveling early, the kids would develop that openness, and it's been really cool to see so much of that manifest on this particular adventure. Travel, it's totally different with kids. Harder for sure, but also really rewarding. And if you love travel and then have kids, it might be comforting to know it doesn't have to end. It just grows into something new. Just like you, like the kids. And when you're right in the thick of it, I highly recommend taking a little step back to appreciate the fact that you're doing it.